Hey everyone, today we're ranking the survivors from least to most good. I was originally going to do this list least to most evil, but I don't really think any of the survivor characters are evil, so I thought I'd flip it and do least to most good, largely in terms of morality. They're going to be put into one of 5 tiers: bad or immoral, okay with grey morality, good with grey morality, good and moral, and finally extremely good and moral. The way that the majority of characters, let alone survivors, are represented is very morally grey in Dead by Daylight, but I want to rank the survivors on how good they are, as I think it's generally more applicable. Let's get into it. Let's start off with the bad or immoral tier. Yunjin Lee is a character with some very questionable morals. The primary thing that makes her questionable is when it's stated in her lore that she discovers the trickster or Ji-woon's murders, as she aligns his tour dates with the dates of his victims' deaths and begins hearing the victims' screams within his songs. Instead of turning him into the police or exposing him, she keeps it quiet because of how damaging it would be for her career. Basically, she doesn't bring multiple deaths to justice just so she can have a better career. Further, after Trickster's no-spin bandmates are killed in a fire, she exploits their deaths in order to launch the Trickster and his solo act, again for monetary gain and success. For these reasons, I think she is probably the closest to being evil out of the survivor characters. David King is one who's slightly unclear on morality, as his perks such as "We're gonna live forever" suggest he's someone altruistic and up for saving others, but his lore makes him out to be a pretty dreadful person, describing him as a debt collector and bare-knuckle fighter. It's made out that he's doing this in quite an illegal capacity as well. So although there's this whole thing of being good to his friends, he still beats people up for money. Likely people in quite vulnerable positions, who have been exploited by others giving them money they can't pay back. It's also hinted that David has likely killed people before. What makes all this even worse to me is that David was born into a rich and successful family, said to be able to give him plenty of opportunities and such, except he squanders it to go to bars and beat people up. To me, I think that makes him pretty irredeemable. Nia Carlson, putting aside the fact that she's the entity for a second, is actually kind of a bad person. Not just for the fact that she's stated to break and enter into places in the lore to spray paint them, but also that she basically commits manslaughter in the lore, after vandalizing someone's car and then fleeing from the scene, leading to their car flipping and them getting killed. There's also the possibility that she was the one who burned down Crotus Pren Asylum, which also means she's kind of committed arson. She does all of this under the guise of it being for the greater good and to punish those who are rich, but when presented with a more impactful opportunity to lend a hand and assist her community by her friend, she effectively turns it down to go commit more crimes. So I really don't think she's that great of a person, even with consideration of her young age and seeming want to do good. Okay, let's move on to those who are okay with grey morality. Ace Visconti I'm mainly saying has questionable morals, for the sole reason that he seems to be a bit of a gambling addict, which has inevitably led to more harm done than good done. It's stated in his lore that he racked up too many debts with the wrong kind of people, and when they finally came to collect, Ace was nowhere to be found. This is pretty dodgy territory if you ask me, and definitely puts him as morally questionable, as someone who seems to be quite self-centered in terms of survival and self-interested for personal gain. It further states that he gambled, scammed, seduced, and smooth-talked his way to a life of luxury as a high roller in the land of opportunity. It outright says that he's a scammer, and his perks heavily suggest he cheats or attempted to cheat at different card games whilst he gambled, with perks like Ace in the Hole. With all this in mind, Ace is definitely immoral, maybe not completely bad, but definitely immoral. Dwight Fairfield I'm also putting in this section, and mainly for one act which I think definitely puts his morality into question. In the lore, Dwight has a pretty mean and cold-hearted boss who he hates. He does some dodgy things like creating lots of fake accounts to shower his boss with praise for his own benefit, but that's not exactly bad considering the situation, but there's worse things that happen. One of his co-workers is treated really badly by his boss, but Dwight doesn't really do much because he's happy about making so much money by not doing much aside boost his boss's ego, and generally just enabling someone who actively destroys other people's careers. He's later convinced by a co-worker to drug his boss with something apparently harmless and supposed to make his boss laugh, and Dwight goes through with it. For the sole fact that Dwight drugs someone else with a substance he doesn't quite know the true effect of, I think puts him as morally grey at the very least, and definitely shows his lower morality. This one's debatable due to how bad the boss is, because his boss is really a terrible person, but he does drug someone by spiking their drink, which is far from being moral. The thing that he spikes his boss with ends up being a hallucinogen, which makes his boss see a room full of people as monsters, leading to him almost killing someone as a result. So yeah, Dwight isn't as innocent as he looks. As a subsection of this tier, let's look at characters who are good under the circumstances. I want to group together a lot of the licensed characters. Ash Williams, Leon S. Kennedy, Jill Valentine, Bill Overbeck, Quentin Smith, Chris Redfield, Claire Redfield, David Tapp, Sybil Bennett, Lisa Garland, and Cheryl Mason, as all of them are kind of technically killers, except given their extremely messed up circumstances, and in the means of self-defense as they are attacked by a multitude of different supernatural things. Aside maybe Tapp, but his situation is still pretty messed up. For this, I think it's a little harsh to say that they're outright bad just for killing, as I think it's a little more nuanced than that. Even more so as the things they are killing are often inhuman, like zombies, or literal supernatural beings or demons, so to a degree I definitely want to apply some extenuating circumstances to this lot, although I do think they are in the morally grey area for killing alone. There are however maybe some of the characters here who are closer to being bad than good. For example, Jill has a whole evil arc within Resident Evil 5, although she is being mind controlled, but I guess the point is that there's something corruptible there. Same goes for a character like Ash, who has direct evil versions of himself. His outlook is also closer to being morally grey, as he seems to gain a degree of enjoyment from his killing, even if what he's killing is deadites and demons. Tapp is also debatably in more dodgy territory, as he becomes obsessed with the Jigsaw Killer, becoming discharged from the police force and acting in his own capacity as he investigates him and another person he suspects, all of it becoming quite obsessive in a dangerous way. On the flip side of this, we can probably outline characters like Lisa, Sybil, Cheryl, Claire, and Leon to be more empathetic and closer to morally good over morally grey, again given their context and extenuating circumstances. Okay, let's move on to those who are good with grey morality. Meg Thomas is someone who is weighted by a large amount of pain and difficult decisions, as she gives up her hopes of becoming a successful runner in order to look after her mother who is ill. This shows her as a caring person. However, we also see the competitive and somewhat dangerous side to her. This side of her leads her to crime, slashing the tires of a police car, and nurturing a growing hatred for her competitors. I think she is good at heart, purely for her caring for her mother despite her young age, sacrificing her own ambition to care for her. However, her need to succeed over others is also quite dangerous and shows her sometimes grey morals, breaking her leg just to win a race and prove someone wrong. On another occasion, she expresses the desire for her rival to die over her losing a race to her, so there's some fairly dodgy territory. Jane Romero and Feng Min are two characters who do actually seem all in all to be pretty good people. However, I do want to mention their potentially grey morality, largely due to their competitive nature and the fact that they often put their own needs above those of others, having a large amount of resentment and anger when things don't go their way. Again, this doesn't make them bad, but I think it definitely puts into question their morals, even if they reach the right place in the end. Steve Harrington is here for the sole reason of his questionable past and actions within the show, which were pretty bad at points, such as when he humiliates Nancy and fights Jonathan. In the show, he's growing and evolving into a far better person, but in terms of the Stranger Things show, this is still a fairly recent development, so I'm going to put him as morally grey, although I do think he is largely a good person and is clearly very set on changing and continuing to be better. I also want to put Jonathan Byers in a similar category to Steve, as I think he's had a similar turnaround. Jonathan in the first season of the show is a bit of a creep, taking pictures of Steve and Nancy from outside Steve's house. He also fights with Steve, and as a whole I think is on a similar redemption arc from his season 1 self. Elodie Rokoto and Felix Richter are somewhat hard to assess, as they do both seem to be good people, but there's the whole issue of their parents' disappearance and the way they react to it. They both have reasonable actions considering that they basically witnessed the entity consume their parents. There's no good way to react to that particularly. I think there is some grey morality however in the fact that Felix basically just gives up on trying to solve what happened or save them. He decides to simply move on. It's hard because partly it's understandable for him to want to move on, but then it's also quite cold to simply give up on them, especially as he describes them in quite high esteem as people. Again, he's not bad for this, but there's definitely some grey morality in abandoning them. Elodie on the flip side spends her whole life trying to track them down and figure out what happened. However, in her journey to do so, it states that she alienates the other pariah members, one of them being Felix, with her theories. She further gets into some dodgy territory as she procures occult relics for a collector, Her work for this collector guy seems a little bit illegal, as it describes her breaking into catacombs and seemingly stealing lots of ancient and valuable relics. I think though, because she stood up to the supernatural entity to find her parents, she is good, but the means she goes about to try and solve what happens definitely shows her grey morality. Okay, now let's look at the good and moral people. Jake Park is going to start us off here in the good and moral category, as a character who we don't really have much to go on, but at the same time this means there isn't much to criticize in the way of him being immoral and such. From what it seems, Jake is pretty reclusive and keeps to himself, but he's a decent guy with solid morals, or good ones, potentially exemplified by his abandoning of a rich lifestyle to pursue something he found more fitting, but also the clear care he shows toward his family and the Tome Law. He didn't just give in to the luxury immediately either, he wanted to do something meaningful with his life. He's just a little lost. He's a survivalist and seems like a generally positive person, his perk Calm Spirit further suggesting he is trusted around animals and wildlife. Laurie Strode and Nancy Wheeler are two characters who face up to supernatural beings and pretty much only fight them in self-defense. Aside this, they are quite similar as studious and hard-working people. Overall, I think in the universes in which they reside, they are pretty good and moral people on the whole. There's not a singular event for either of them that I think strays them into more morally grey territory, so I think they are both definitely close to being good and moral people, especially given the strange supernatural circumstances they find themselves in. Jeff Johansson is up next as someone who's basically completed their redemption, and is now living as a good and moral person prior to being taken by the entity. He lives a chilled out life working as an artist and looking after his dog. He's overcome a bad childhood where his parents fought constantly, further having run-ins with the wrong kinds of people, like Frank of the Legion. This makes his redemption a key tell of his character, and I think further shows him as a good and moral person. From his perks like Aftercare, we also get the idea that he's quite empathetic too. Zarina Kassir is someone presented as quite morally good, as she sets her sights on avenging her father who was killed by a gang. She interviews the person who killed him and gets him to confess, exposing him in her documentary and becoming known and well respected, the film gaining international acclaim for exposing the horrors of gang violence, and it standing as a tribute to her father. Despite many times throughout her life that have been tough, Zarina always pushes through, even when it comes to her father and his murder. Her desire to expose the wrongdoings of the world is definitely something that shows her character, not seeking critical acclaim, but receiving it for her hard work and morality and search for the truth. Yui Kimura on the whole is presented as a very good person. She does take part in illegal street races, but she does this because she wants to be able to provide for those who rely on her. It's never about herself in any way. She becomes known as a symbol of women's empowerment after starting the Sakura 7 group and helping lots of women with use of her race winnings. Even during these street races when someone else is injured, she goes back to help them, showing further she doesn't do them out of self-interest or for personal monetary gain. The only reason why I'm not classifying her as extremely good is because of these illegal races, but still it's a small thing for all the good that she does. Okay, now let's go on to our final tier of extremely good and moral. Kate Denson is described as a ray of hope within the entity's realm and is largely described as just being a pure and good person. Through her lore, she travels around, connecting with people through her music, returning to her hometown when she can to help out in her community and entertain the local children with stories of her travels. She's also one of the only people we know of to have actively fought off the entity after it tries to take her, suggesting she is so good that she could initially resist the evil and corruption of the entity itself. The only reason why she's a little lower in this tier is that there is a slow corruption that does build inside of her, leading her to more dark and melancholy music. It seems suggested that she is partly corrupted by the entity after she manages to fight it off, almost like a part of it rubbed off on her. Despite this though, she is still presented as extremely good and moral as a person. Claudette Morel is probably the most moral and good character in the Survivor roster. She seems completely objected to harming others, even when others treat her poorly or isolate her. Her studies into botany appear to be partly for reasons of helping others, and she's constantly shown to be very empathetic and, well, good basically. She's a hard worker, good friend, and good person. So yeah, I'm saying out of all the characters, she's definitely one of the most moral and good. Adam Francis is an all-around good guy. He works hard to become a teacher and move to Japan, trying his best to learn the language and make ends meet. He does all of this despite losing his father at a young age due to a car crash and being bullied throughout his school years. He also seems to care greatly for his students and their education. When he's in a train crash at the end of his lore, he moves himself in the way of an unhinged door so that it hits him instead of another passenger. Yeah, basically he's a hard worker, teacher, and generally just a good guy. I think just for this factor of throwing himself in the path of danger for another person, I'm gonna put him just above Claudette. Alright, well, that's gonna do it. I do hope you enjoyed, and please do drop your own thoughts down below. Thanks, and goodbye.